Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
If Shishir Kumar Bhaduri had been, at one point of time, major point of departure for you, moving away from your earlier notions of theatre and acting to a completely different way of looking at theatre, in 1958, it was your exposure to and your connection with Satyajit Ray that marked yet another major departure. It's time, I think, to talk about your first encounter leading on to your first role in Satyajit Ray's Opus Shongshar.
Well, when you say my first encounter, I'm leaving out my first encounter with Satyajit Ray's films, which was really phenomenal for me. I mean, it completely changed my view of film acting, I should say. Because prior to seeing Pather Panchali, I always thought that Bengali film acting was not of much substance or of value. But when we saw Pather Panchali, it completely revolutionized our ideas. So later on, when he was trying to he has made up his mind to make the second part of the trilogy, that is the Aparajito. He was then looking for someone to play the role of the adolescent Opu. So there was a friend of ours who was again a friend to Satyajit Ray's assistant, Nityananda Dattu. Nityananda Dattu is the person who made this Baksho Badul and Hotat Dekha, Shishprur. So Nityananda Dattu took me to Satyajit Ray. I didn't know that who he was. I was going to coffee house and my friend Arun was coming from the opposite direction. So he was trying to keep me engaged in some conversation so that Nityananda on the other could assess if I was all right to be taken to Satyajit Ray. I found it out and I said, "Who are you gesturing at?" He said that, "Let me tell you the truth. He is an assistant to Satyajit Ray and Satyajit Ray is going to make the second part and looking for someone to play Apu. So would you agree to go and see him?" I said, "Yes, of course. If it is Satyajit Ray, I must go because we have already seen Pather Panchali at that time." As soon as I entered the room, Satyajit Ray, before being introduced or anything formal happening between us, he just said, "Oh, you are too big." That impressed me so much. I thought that the man should be so deeply immersed in his creative thought that he sees nothing else beyond that at that moment. Then he, of course, said, "I'm sorry, come and sit down here." And he started talking to me. But more than he talking, he made me talk a lot because much later I found out that it was his method of sort of assessing a potential actor. His diction, his
Even
voice,
his personality.
his personality, how good his Bengali is, which was very important to him. Because some of the very good-looking girls he would come across would sometimes speak such a mutilated and so-called sophisticated version of Bengali that he would again give up the idea of taking them in the films. Anyway, this happened when he was trying to make Aparajito. And I offered to bring some of my friends and show him if he would like any one of them. He didn't like any one of them. No one. Later on, his assistant, one of his assistants, Shubir Hajra, he always used to tell me, "Manikda has seen you and he has something about you in mind." I didn't quite believe. I said, "No, I have not been selected. Why should he remember me?" But when he decided to make the third part, he positively sent Shubir Hajra for me so that I go and see him. This time also, as soon as I entered the room, he said, "Oh, so they said that there are so many marks on your face." I don't find them. They're all right. It's all right. Again, I sat down and said, "Are you still interested in acting?" I said, "Yes." Then he said, "I'm thinking of making the third part of the trilogy now. Will you be interested?" I said, "Of course, yes. Well, I may need you." And I didn't realize that it was for Apu again. We were a little stupid in those days. Anyway,
And maybe your old inferiority complex was still working.
maybe my old inferiority complex. I never could think that I should be selected to play the main role. Anyway, so he said that I will take voice test of yours and also a camera test. The voice test, he first said that you said that you were working in All India Radio. When do you announce? I would like to hear your voice. I told him what are my duty schedules, and he said, then again asked me to recite something for him. And I recited, I remember, Bashi. And when he was listening to that, two of them, two directors came to listen to that, and he asked them, how do you find him, this voice? They never knew that I was the person standing right by his side. They said, oh, well, the voice is not very good, but his pronunciation is not bad. That's what they condescendingly said. Anyway, that's how he took my voice test. I mean, he said that it is good enough. And when everything was settled, even my name was announced in the paper, after that, he took a camera test. But I came to realize much later that that was for my benefit, so that I become used to facing a camera, because he did not need it. Yeah, and before that actual movie camera test, he took so many still photographs of mine. It was to give me an added confidence about facing a movie camera, which prompted him to arrange for a movie camera test. Anyway, that's how it all started. He gave me, there was a preparation period, He gave me the first draft of this script, which prior to that, he never gave to any actor, because he thought that one of the most challenging things that he's going to do is to do an adult Topu playing in the role of a married man and all that. So he was very conscious that he should not by any means resemble any other so-called romantic heroes or anything. He should be fresh and different in the first place, and he should be somehow prepared for the work. So he gave me the first draft. After reading the first draft, I also did some preparations, in the sense that I wrote an imaginary diary of Apu.
That was your idea.
That was my idea. That's my idea of sort of creating a complete whole character. The scenes where he's not seen on the screen, I would write in my diary that I did such and such thing, or went to such and such place, or met such and such people and had such and such conversation, that kind of a thing. And I would show that to Satyajit Ray. But I was a little nervous in the beginning that he may laugh it away and would not really be very encouraging. But to my surprise, I found that he was very, very helpful in that. He said, yes, this is very good, but why did you write that you went to see your friend on a Sunday? You could have gone to see a cinema. Which means he was provoking me to think and imagine. Imagining is a primary duty of an actor, to imagine the real, trying to imagine the real. And these things started with Apu Sangsar itself. When I first had a very long close-up in which I was talking to my friend, I had to imagine that he was standing there right in front of me. But there, right in front of me was the camera and the director and the cameraman and the crew. But I had to imagine that he was standing there. So imagining is very important. So that's how the first encounter started, how he picked me up.
But when you were doing Apu Sangsar, would you recall any important situation where it was his input and your input and the two together working into a kind of a chemistry? Or, as you have told me on other occasions, it was never him directing you to do this and this and this?
Hardly ever. I mean, once or twice maybe, but not most of the time, never. But the very idea of he giving me a first draft of the script, he taking me to morning show Hollywood films to show me examples of cinema acting like Lost Weekend. There's a marvelous cinema acting. And then also giving me some books at times. He said, what are the books you have read of Stanislavski? I said, I have read this and that. And he would say that you haven't read this Building a Character? I said, no. Okay, I will give you that. He will pick up the book from his shelf and give me that. I mean, he was preparing me in a different way, not just giving me lectures about acting. And the process of learning acting should be like that, absorbing something. You are like a blotting paper. You absorb some ink, some impression, some images. But you can't codify acting. You can't put it in a capsule and give it to a learner. I mean, that's useless, I believe. So that he was doing. And during the actual process of shooting, he would only read out this scene, or maybe later on sometimes he would send the scenes written the previous day. And even if he has sent the scene written, he would again read out the scene to the actor, to me at least. And I would do accordingly. He would only interfere maybe in one place where he said, Soumitra, don't go that far to the corner, because in that case you will be almost in the shadow. You try to remain up to this way, taking the light. Just that's about all. Even in later days, I have found, he would interfere only when I was going outside his scheme of the character. Then he would say, Soumitra, I don't want so much of comedy here. Bas. He would not say that, do this or do that. He gave me so much freedom throughout my career, I should say, which I have never received from any other director.
But there are also cases, for example, the case of Obhijan, where you bring in your language.
Yes, that was my contribution to the character. Because I have met and spent a lot of time with such characters when I was in the school. There were a host of taxi drivers and bus drivers with whom I used to sit in Howrah Maidan and sit in their taxis or in their buses and remain there in the bus for the whole day, maybe, eating with them, drinking tea with them. And I have seen them, how they speak, how they behave. So when we started filming Obhijan with he as a director, after 2 days of shooting gone, he came to direct the film, and I said that, Manida, I want to say the dialogues in a particular dialect like this. He said, let me hear. I told the dialogue. He didn't say anything. So we were rehearsing, the lighting was being done and everything, and when finally the shot was to be taken, I went up to him and said that, Manida, can I do this? Can I keep this? He, exactly in the same tone, said, yeah, I have no objection, but I am only thinking of the love scenes, how it will sound in the love scenes. Anyway, but later on, after a few days, he used to write his dialogues in that dialect and send me. I mean, which he accepted. That was my contribution to the characterization.
Any other instance of where you bring in something of your own?
There's something very interesting happened during Shaka Pushaka. Before, he used to read all his scripts, even if I was not in this film, he would read it out to me. But in Shaka Pushaka, he said in his typical gentle, kind manner, he said, Soumitra, in this film that I am thinking of making now, this is the one which was published in your action, my original screenplay. I am now updating it and we shall make a film out of it. But I will need someone who has only 25 words to speak in the whole film. but I need someone on whom I can depend. Will you have time to do that? Well, he could have ordered me to do that, but he was so gentle, he would always approach like that. I said, of course he is. Then he one day read out his script to me. And after he finished the script, he said, Soumitra, I have given you enough freedom throughout your career. Whatever you have wanted to do, I have allowed you to do so. But this film, we are going to think together. Because you have seen many deranged persons, so have I. But we will have to select only those behaviors, those behavior patterns which suits my script. And he said, these persons, these deranged people, they have a compulsive habit, usually. I immediately said, yes, I agree. So in this case, I have thought that he uses his hands in thumping on a table for when he's quiet and in good mood, listening to his music, he may be keeping the rhythm with his hand. But when he's protesting or when he's angry, like in the scene where they are eating together, the whole family, and he starts thumping on the table very violently. I said, Manida, this is a wonderful idea, I will do that. But when the actual scene was being taken, that scene where the eating scene,
the dinner scene,
I said, Manida, I have another thing to add. He said, what? I said, I have seen these kind of deranged people who have some kind of tics sometimes, like shaking their heads or body shake, something like that. He said, okay, show me during the rehearsal. I did that. And I said, yes. Only just said yes. And I combined that hand thumping and shaking of my head together. And when this shot was over, he just very quietly said, excellent. Well, that was a prize, coming from him. So that's how we sometimes sort of thought together, and I sometimes contributed. Now, this Charulata handwriting, for example, the whole idea was his. Because who knew calligraphy better? Who knew the handwriting better than him? He said that, Soumitra, I'm afraid you will have to change your handwriting for the film. I said, why, Manida? He said, because it was written by Rabindranath Tagore. We can assume that he was writing about a time prior to his own. So before Rabindranath, the whole of Bengali nation did not write in such a handwriting like Rabindranath. Yours is a Tagorean handwriting. So that won't do. You will have to get back to the pre-Tagorean handwriting. I said, oh, I don't know how to write that. He said, I will give you samples. He gave me photographed pieces of puthis, and he wrote many that kind of handwriting and indicated what were the specialities before Tagore came. The Ilek and everything, the straight lines and everything, he pointed out. And then I started practicing that kind of handwriting. So it was his idea, but that practicing for 6 months and changing my handwriting for good is certainly my contribution to the film. And I don't think it has ever happened to any other actor in the world.
Even while you're working with Satyajit Ray, you started working with other directors. And who are the first directors who picked you up? Not the mainstream professionals immediately, but of course Tapan Sinha.
Tapan Sinha was a mainstream director, all right. And he was the most successful mainstream director at that moment. Now, there again, I was very lucky. Not because he was the most successful director, but because he had a very deep, abiding interest in the discipline of acting.
Right.
And he used to teach his newcomers the ways of cinema acting. And I learned so many things from Tapan Sinha that I have no end of indebtedness to this person. He taught me how to walk in the
Your
sense.
first work was in
In Khudito Pashan, The Hungry Stones, where he said that, look here, you would be required to walk during the night scenes, lot of walk in the corridors of the palace. So we are going to put the set much before the actual shooting, and we will rehearse. And during the rehearsal, he said, no, you can't walk like as you have walked in Obu Shongshar. That's your own walk. But a hero should walk differently. The poise and grace and the confidence to carry oneself on your own legs should show in your walk. So he showed me what should be my stepping, how far I should take one step, and what should be the position of my shoulders, what should be the business of my hands. All he showed. He taught me how to act like a hero. And also many other things. That way I was very lucky that the very second person I came across in my very second film was a teacher again. So I was groomed.
After you become a hero, as you said, and Topanda had a role in it, in making a hero out of you, you came through a period, you went through a period when you had the great rival hero, Uttam Kumar.
Yeah.
And virtually
in the very second film of Topunda,
again,
I came to work with him.
So what was your response to the Uttam Kumar phenomenon? B, what was your interaction with Uttam Kumar as actor, as individual, the whole ambience of it?
Well, it could have been extremely difficult to work with Uttam Kumar at that moment had he not been a friend of our family. Because, he was at the height of his glory at that moment, and let me admit that I was a fan of Uttam Kumar from my college days. I liked him. And I did not like Suchitra Sen, to be very honest. Uttam Kumar was my favorite. And all my other friends were a fan of Suchitra Sen and not Uttam Kumar. I used to argue with them. Used to say that he is a genuine actor. They said he has so many mannerisms. He is so much in the frame of a typical romantic image. I said, it doesn't matter, but he is a genuine actor. I never wanted to be an actor like Uttam Kumar or never followed him, copied him, never. But I could appreciate him from the very beginning. And he, by virtue of being a friend of my sister's husband, came to our house during the wedding. And from then on, I used to go to his house. He used to come to our house as well. We were friends. So it made it a little easier for me to act for the first time with him. But I should also admit that I was a little cautious, a little tense, not much. Because, again, my models were different. In theatre, I had Shishir Kumar Bhaduri as a model. In cinema, I used to admire Balraj Sahni. I was sold on Balraj Sahni. So I never wanted to be a Uttam Kumar. But the very first day, I learned something from Uttam Kumar.
In Jinderbandi.
In Jinderbandi. The very first day we were shooting together. The very first shot, in fact, that we were together. This was a scene when he stamps out my sign of recognition on the badge of recognition from my coat. This scene, maybe he was also a little tense because I have come on this scene as a very promising someone. Although we were family friends, but on the floor, that's a different tale altogether. So he was a little different and he forgot one line or something. He just waved at the camera and said, oh, cut it. I mean, as if he made a favor to the cameraman and the director by making the shot not good, NG. Before that, I always used to be more tense if something went wrong for me and the shot was an NG. I thought, okay, I have wasted some film material. I have been bad. But I learnt how to make an NG, and with what grace and with what confidence. And I have learned so many things from him by watching him. I have learned watching many actors, and certainly Uttam Kumar was one of them. The poise and grace and the confidence with which he used to face a camera was really very praiseworthy. He must have learned it from the seniors like Chobi Bishwas. I also learned many things from Chobi Bishwas. And the other thing, this is my personal, absolutely personal appreciation of the man. He is the best romantic hero that we have seen in Bengali films. No one is so appealing. No one looks like a next door neighbor like Uttam Kumar. At the same time, no one looks such a believable lover. He is my hero.
As you came into cinema, you were also working with other actors who are established here, and not just the stars. Uttam Kumar was the star, but there were other actors and quite a lot of brilliant actors. Veterans like Tulsi Chakraborty, Johor Rai,
Bhanu Banerjee,
and then Robi Ghosh, etc. More of your contemporaries, they also come in. How did you interact with them? Did you take things from them? And what were your relationships with them?
Oh yes, I used to take things from them always. Tulsi Chakraborty is simply, I don't know how to describe him. It was simply godly. It's out of this world. You hardly get an actor, even in the world cinema, who can be compared with Tulsi Chakraborty. He was so natural. You'd feel that he has never learnt anything about acting. He's just cut from life and put into a film. That kind of an actor. And he's so believable in his expressions. His humor springs from the grassroots of Bengali life. Typical Bengali middle class trepidations, I should say, is represented in his acting. So was Bhanu Johor, but the Bhanu Johor were both exposed to Hollywood clowns, the great Hollywood clowns. So you can trace some element of Hollywood in their acting, some double takes, something like that. Robi again was exposed to very good Hollywood cinema. And Robi had marvelous timing, a beautiful voice, beautiful diction. Although I should say that Bhanu Johor's, these two, they had more variations. That's why they survived for more than 300 films and could retain their, sort of acceptability to the general public as comedians. Robi should be put into one category of acting, of comedy, but that he did superbly. Superb. He had such a sense of timing. And with such an innocent face, he would come out with his lines. That was brilliant, absolutely. I have learnt all these. In fact, when Johor Da or Bhanu Da or Robi, they would come to see me acting in some play, I would come and joke with them, saying that this, all I have learned from watching you, that was a comedy acting, I have learned from you. So if I go wrong, it is your fault.
When you become a hero, also at one point a romantic hero, even rivaling Uttam Kumar, would you like to talk about your heroines, how you interacted with them and how the pairing, which has always been a very important part of the Indian cinema or even mainstream cinema everywhere?
I must say that it took more time for me to be friendly with my heroines than my male co-actors, because of initial kind of shyness that I sort of brought in from my family background and everything. I was a little shy about women, although I was very strongly interested in women and girls, but would not like to show that. you know. And my colleagues, the female colleagues, sometimes I would feel a little scared to mix very openly with them. But my nature and my interest in the women very soon overcame my shyness. And some of them have remained, I mean, most of them have remained lifetime friends. All my heroines, I have never broken away with any heroine. Maybe temporarily so, I have quarreled with some heroine, but most of them are my friends even today. They have remained.
But acting-wise, who are the heroines with whom, who are the
Well, the
actresses
first
with whom
name
you...
that comes is Soumitra Chattopadhyay. She's so brilliant, absolutely. She is as good in the tragedy, as good in the comedy, in any kind of, in sarcasm, in sympathy, showing sympathy. She is a typical embodiment of Bengali womanhood.
Now, one of the things about you...
But I must say, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I must add that all the other heroines, they had their own qualities too. For instance, very few would equal Soumitra Chattopadhyay in a working woman's role. In, like, say, in Megatakatara, or in many, in with me in Ayananto, or in Swaralipi, Swayamvara. Very few would be as beautiful as Madhavi Mukherjee, as she is in Subarnarekha or Charulata or Kapurush. And there were many others also. But Savitri, acting-wise, she may not be as beautiful as Suchitra Sen. I'm sorry, but Suchitra Sen comes nowhere near Savitri Chattopadhyay as far as acting is concerned. I don't know if I should be so honest and frank, but I am.
For the archives, why not? The other thing, Soumitra, that since besides your work with Satyajit Ray or Mrinal Sen or Topanda, you have been a major figure in the Bangla mainstream cinema. And all over India, there has been this tendency, or rather this desire among actors in the other languages to go over to the Hindi cinema. You haven't really ever moved into the Hindu cinema as such, the Hindu mainstream, or even the Hindi parallel cinema. You haven't had much to do with that. What was the reason, A? And B, did it also have, apart from the other things, the question of language, culture, etc., did it also have to do with the image of the Bombay heroes, the Bombay star? Did that represent something at an extreme from what you were nurturing and cultivating and developing over the years as your acting?
You have hit the nail. That was one reason, the image of the hero of Mumbai cinema, that repelled me in the first place. And then the kind of anecdotes that used to fly in the air also repelled me from the Hindi films or from going to Bombay, because I knew that if I migrated to Bombay, I would have to sacrifice one very vital thing. That was my style of living, the way I wanted to live. I may have been an actor. I may have to accept many ways of the film industry, many norms, many patterns of mixing with people. But I never wanted to give up my inner freedom to live as I would like to. I was an inner directed man. So I thought that if I go to Bombay, I'll have to become like them. That I was scared about that. I never wanted to be that. And, well, I was not very scared about Hindi, because I knew that if I tried, I would certainly speak good Hindi, much better than many. Normally, language comes to me very easily. But I was also very sure that a great work of acting can never be accomplished without a mastery of one's the language that you are acting. And as I told you in the beginning of this interview, that I always considered my grasp over my mother tongue much more than most actors. I thought that there I shall be at a disadvantage by not being able to use my mother tongue and to act in a language which is not my own. In fact, maybe I can imitate a Hindi accent or everything, but I don't know Hindi as well as I know English.
But when you look at Hindi cinema or even cinema in the other Indian languages, you've seen a lot of that. Have you ever come to recognize the power, the originality of an actor within his language context, within his culture context, within the context of that particular cinema? Has it happened with other actors, your
yes.
contemporaries in Indian cinema?
Oh yes, like Nasiruddin, like Om Puri, like many others as well. Even today's actors in the mainstream cinema, like, well, I keep forgetting names these days. There are so many. Particularly, I'm a very great admirer of Nasir. And Om as well. Om also is very good, but Nasir has more variety, I should say. It has always happened. You know, Shyam Benegal once wanted me to work in his Kal Yug. I went to Bombay to listen to his script, but I did not like the role he offered. The role was that of which Yudhishthir,
Okay.
and not the principal role that was of Karna, which was done by the producer himself, the producer being a friend of mine, Shashi Kapoor. So I told Shashi that you have taken the best role and you are offering me the second one. I am not coming. So anyway, but I don't know if the role would have been good. Well, the whole course of history would have been different, probably. I would have worked with Shyam Benegal and would have worked in many more, at least out of the beaten track cinemas. But that never happened. But I have admired many actors like Nasir, Om, today's Ashish Vidyarthi, so many of them. And even previously, I used to appreciate the work of Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor. But, sorry again, I wasn't a fan of Devanand.
Much later, you have also acted in films in English.
Yeah.
What have been your experiences? Because here you were working in another language, in another culture, in another cinematic setting also.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, the roles that I have played with these directors, I mean the English or French or Italian directors, did not quite demand from me a departure from my own culture, because most roles were Indian roles. So that way, I was rooted to my culture. But the language, I had to be cautious about using my language. What really impressed me was not the directors, but the technicians, the other technicians, the thoroughness with which they learn their trade, the thoroughness with which they go on about their trade. It's amazing, absolutely. We don't always find that in our setups. You know, I saw one sound recordist who worked in Shakha Prashakha. It was a joint venture film. That sound recordist came a couple of weeks before the start of the shooting. He listened to the script from Satyajit Ray himself, discussed it with him, and then for one whole week, we used to see him roaming around in the studios, all corner of the studios, and jotting down God knows what, and I asked him and then came to know that he was jotting down what are the usual sounds during which part of the day coming from which corner of the studio. So when he sets his microphone, he would cut out those angles. I mean, this kind of meticulous attention to work is I haven't seen here. The makeup artist, a girl who was in charge of a makeup artist in Lanui, Bengali, she had to sort of make a few strands of white grey hair on my scalp. So I thought that she will take a broad brush and put some whitener on my hair. She didn't do that. She took a very thin few string brush and was painting one by one the hairs she wanted to look grey. I mean, this is so it shows the thoroughness of their training as well as their dedication towards the work.
What have been your connections or your interaction with the other directors in Bengali cinema besides Satyajit Ray and Tapan Sinha? And would you mention some of the films? Because it has been sad that you have worked in so many films in terms of numbers, and quite a lot of them are quite poor films. So what are the films that you have found rewarding working and you really think that you gave something of yours into them? Some of the more striking instances.
It was really enjoyable working with Mrinalda for one simple reason. That is that he used to write his dialogues so lifelike, so bright. I enjoyed. And, he has a friendly personality. So, as it is, I am also very outgoing in that way. And except maybe one or two, I have always clicked very well with my director and become friends. To form a rapport with the director was very easy for me. But Mrinalda, being a very knowledgeable person, very well versed with the world cinema, it was delightful working with him. And apart from Mrinalda, Ashit Sin also was a very delightful person, and he, particularly as a technician, he was very good. He knew what to expect of his actors, and he also could sort of inspire them or provoke them to put their best foot forward. So Ashita was also very good. Ajay Kaur, who knew his business very well. What Ajay Kaur always needed was a good script. Given a good script, Ajay Kaur would always turn out a good film. Then there was one director with whom I was very impressed. He was such a dedicated director. That was Bijay Bose, with whom I did one of the best mainstream films of my career, Baghini. And I saw the Baghini film very recently, after so many years, 40 years maybe, and found that I never noticed that Jor Rai and Bhanu Banerjee, these two comedians, and Ravi Ghosh, these three of them, has been used in the Baghini film as character actors and not comedians. Very strange. I mean, the other potential that these actors had was seen by this director and used. This man, Bijay Bose, was a dedicated man. The other film I did with him was Sargadupi Guryoshi, which was also good, pretty good. But Baghini was really very good film. So these are some of the directors who remember. And Torun Mojumdar was always very good to work with because of his marvelous technical ability. He knows thoroughly how to make a film. You can differ with him in the question of content. You may not like the content of his film. You may think that it is too commercially oriented film. But how to make a film, he is second to none. He's so good. He's absolutely wonderful technician, craftsman. And he had given me some of the best opportunities for my acting, like Devu Pandit in Ganodevata, and more so in that Sangsar Shimante's Aghor, the role of a thief. For instance, the makeup was my idea. Also, the idea was partly shared by Rajen Torpdar, who first wrote the script.
What about the new young directors who have emerged who find you a very great support for the work even the later Gautam or
Yeah,
Rituparno?
Gautam, Rituparno. Rituparno is a much later. Gautam and Aparna Sen, for instance, and Raja Mitro. These three have given me very good roles to play. Particularly, I would mention Raja Mitro, Ekti Jibon. When Raja Mitro came to me for this role and said that, would you be interested in the film? I said, I said, sit down for a while. And I went inside and brought at least a dozen dictionaries from because I am also in love with words, So I showed him, you see, so I should be too happy to do the role. And that's how he took about 5 years to complete, because he ran out of funds quite often. Finally, Manikda put him in touch with NFDC, and NFDC bailed him out. Also, Gautam Ghosh's Dakha was a memorable experience.
Great work.
Very good work. And Koni is another film which I would like to remember. First, it pleased Manikda also. Manikda said it's one of the better kind of Bengali films that I have seen. He said about the film. For me, it is almost, a perennial inspiration. That word has become an inspirational line for, probably not for me only, for many, many, many Bengalis. To say that fight, Koni, fight. When I am in depression, I'm feeling sad, I just keep saying myself, fight. It revives me. It's an inspiration. And I worked very hard for that film too.
One last question in this phase. In your work in the later Tapan Sinha films, like Atunko particularly, or Wheelchair, or even the Gautam film that you mentioned, Dakha, the kind of role you bring out, a man who has gone through a lot of experience and taken it all within and lives out of that and has a different view of the reality and even isolates himself from the reality, takes him out of the reality and looks at it in its
looks at it objectively
in its totality. Does it have a lot to do? Because these roles, particularly those that I mentioned, when I watch them, I also see a lot of you, Soumitra, in it, rather than role-playing.
Shomik, you are probably right in the sense that although I wasn't very conscious of making it projection of myself, but unconsciously there must have been this aspect of taking myself, or rather my experiences, and putting them at a distance, looking at them objectively, and sort of leaving a comment on my own life as well. When I do Koni, I do that. When I do Wheelchair, I do that. Or Atonko, the man who has been teaching. And at a certain moment of time, this man says that all my teaching has been in vain. So that's how you feel too about your own life. Yes, there are a bit of my projection, my own projection, but not so consciously, maybe semi-consciously or subconsciously they have come into.